The Raspberry House by J. Wilburn. John Raspberry didn't have the language to express that he was having panic attacks. They weren't all the time and never at work at the prison, thank God. If he was in a place to pay attention, if he was in a place to um, hmm, pay attention to patterns, John would realize that the attacks always came after the pressure was off. They'd hit when he was parked somewhere drinking in secret, or like today, when he was sitting in the driveway out of view of the street around the side of their ridiculous pink house. I bit my tongue. That's unpleasant. All right. He had bitten through his cigarette. He spit out the loose tobacco. Okay, let me see if I can spell that right. Loose tobacco. Nope. And the filter inside his mouth. Okay. I wanted him to turn him into a smoker here. All right, he hit the steering wheel with his fist closed, but struck himself at the wrist, causing numbing pain to travel up his arms. His hair swung sweaty into his face like some derelict. He heaved for breath, but his throat felt tight, and he couldn't get enough air into his lungs. Again, there was a pattern. If he waited, it would pass, and he'd be fine except for a particularly intense headache. But as far as John was concerned, he was about to die every time. As he finished his fit, as John thought of them, he shook with fear of the place he worked. It had been 1 year since the storm, the riots, and the escapes and all those losses. Grinder State Prison was being rebuilt, even as it operated from 2 cell blocks and a temporary cafeteria. Offices were in trailers across the street where help would be far away if it was needed. He returned to slow wheezes as the attack subsided. John leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, still sure he would die this time. So many of the guys he knew he could count on had died that day in the summer of '79. Carter, Fillmore, Jasper, Clayton, the list went on. The ones who didn't die were transferred. The ones not transferred were laid off. And John had his fits after bad shifts, pinned between the wish that they'd let him go and the terror of being without a job or caught not fit for it. Thinking about it made him want to go over in another wave of panic, but he found he could take deeper breaths again. The headache was here to ruin his evening before he had to go back to Grinder again, let's say in the morning. He took out another cigarette and managed not to bite it in half this time. All right, let's say John, because we'll keep it he. He opened the car door and leaned on the hood as he searched for his balance. The damn heat and the damned humidity greeted him and made his gut swirl to go with the pain and the weakness that followed a fit. John slammed his car door hard enough to shake it on its shocks and echo through the yards. The dog behind the back fence scraped the boards and gave its deep demon barks as it jumped up against the other side. He normally liked dogs, not enough to take care of one himself, but he liked them. He did not like that demon dog that barked so low, loud, and slobbery from with any sound he heard on the raspberry side of the fence. Let's say, in response to any sound he heard on the raspberry side of the fence. The barking made his head hurt more. John rounded the car. John rounded the car with his teeth locked together. No, he wouldn't do that. With his teeth, no, with the unlit cigarette between his lips, and wrestled open the screen door. Let's see. Wrestled open the screen door. Apparently that's not a compound word. Alright. Like he was fighting his way into his own house. Slippery with sweat, the way he always was after one of his fits, he stepped into the cool of the living room by the kitchen and stripped off his work shirt. The embroidered name above the pocket said Rasp. All the guards knew his name was Raspberry, but he didn't want to deal with teasing from the inmates, so he went with John Rasp on the floor, and none of the degenerates were the wiser. Trixie, he called as he dropped his wet uniform shirt over the back of a dining room chair. He took a moment to try to light up. He managed to flick his lighter, but couldn't bring flame to the tip with his shaking hands. He managed to hold down the rage for now. Clapping the lighter closed, he would try again in a moment. Alright. I decided I needed to be a smoker for this story, but had to add all that in. He untucked his yellowed undershirt as he stalked through the hall to the bedrooms. Trixie, you hear? His own voice hurt his head, and he squinted through tears of pain. The pictures on the wall blurred, the bookshelf on the end with the hardback spines and Trixie's knickknacks looked to be behind and looked to be behind rain-drenched glass. All right. I may have to cut that whole sentence. I'm not sure it makes good sense. He turned the corner to step into the bedroom and hit his elbow on the knob. All right. I don't know why I put knock. On the knob of the open door at the end of the hall. John hissed and held his arm as he started to say, Trixie, could you just see yourself closing the damn... He stopped mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-motion. John pulled the cigarette out of his mouth with the hand still holding the lighter. Trixie wasn't in the bedroom, even though... Alright, Trixie wasn't in the bedroom. Did I misspell lighter? I don't think I did. Okay, no I did not. Computer's lying to me. Alright. Trixie wasn't in the bedroom, even though her car was in the detached garage. She could have gone for a walk, though she hadn't done that much recently. She could be at a neighbor's gossiping away. He could have missed her somewhere else in the house in his blind pain, but she'd need to explain not answering him. John wasn't on any of those details, though. No, he was focused on that open door. He'd hit his elbow on the knob of a door that shouldn't exist. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom and across the hall from the guest room no one stayed in. But Trixie insisted on having... that no one stayed in, but Trixie insisted on having, let's say, anyway, like all civilized folks did. That was all the doors on this end of the hall, but now he stared at an open third. It was dark in there. A breeze that actually felt good against his sweaty body blew out of it, and to damn it all, there were unfinished board stairs leading down into a basement below the house that was not there. Below a basement below the house that was not, let's say, supposed to be there. John had gone into the crawl space on multiple occasions to take care of air conditioning or plumbing issues he could not afford to pass off to a professional. They had a crawl space, not a basement. But there was a third door, open ajar, that led down to a basement in their house. That wasn't all of it either. The bookshelf was still there. The hardback spines, the knickknacks, the black and white photos of great generations long gone, all still stood along that flat, doorless wall. At the same time, the door to the impossible basement hung open, with its cool subterranean air puffing into John's sweaty face. He almost believed he could set his lighter on that shelf despite the door seeming to occupy the same space and time. John set the lighter and the wet cigarette, I say the damp, no, moist, the moist cigarette on the bedside table instead. Both realities were true, and both could not exist at the same time. John knew the shelf was real and the door was false, but he still held his aching elbow from the knob, from that knob, and he saw the basement. All right. As the tears cleared his eyes, he saw the two realities trying to merge in a race. The shelf started to go and would leave the door to their basement that didn't look new at all. Then the door would fade, and the shelf would impose itself where it belonged and had always been. John knew, he just knew, like the headache, this delusion was part of the after effect of his recent fit. If he waited it out, the alien door would be gone, and he would lay down for the evening. He hated going to bed early, even with one of his killer headaches, because it just brought back the prison sooner. He almost let it go, sanity almost won, but then he grabbed the edge of that mysterious door and everything changed. He could still see the shelf if he tried, but he had committed to the reality of that intruding door. John swung it open, and he walked toe up to the tacked-down brass runner that went under the door. It was meant to keep out drafts. The brass was old, chipped, and dented like it had been in place for years. So who the hell put it there? Who added the basement? How long ago? What was going on down there all this time while John only saw the shelf? Amazement and maybe the fear. All right, I need to make that a compound word. Amazement and maybe the fear that he should have been feeling got mixed up with the anger that he always felt after a fit. If John had the language to express what he was going through, he'd be able to explain that anger came from a place of shame and helplessness against what was happening to him. But no one in his life taught those sorts of introspective skills. Not to mention that he was staring down a set of basement steps in a house he had lived in for years without a basement. He reached out and flipped a stiff switch that turned on a bare bulb above the bottom of the steps. It was a concrete floor down there. It was dusty and dry with age. In this part of South Carolina, this close to the beach, any basement dug this deep wouldn't just be wet. It would be a dirty swimming pool. Not the impossible basement, though. John pushed the door the rest of the way open, and all hints of the shelf were gone. Once he committed to it, he took the steps quickly and held onto the railings as he stood at the bottom. Those railings were in need of tightening if this place was to become a permanent fixture. Shelves of books lined the concrete walls. Workbenches with a scattering of old neglected tools marked various points around the room. He turned to see more pallets of cardboard boxes stretching down another wing of the L-shaped basement. He supposed he had no way of determining the shape based on what he could see. Maybe this was a labyrinth that stretched out forever. John tried to orient himself. This L, he could see, would lead out under the front yard and maybe the street itself. That wasn't right. Beyond the idea that this basement shouldn't exist at all, that's not how they were built. The yard and street would fall in if they were. He sort of forgot trying to orient this reality when he spied a dirty window looking out into what should have been underground. John glanced up the stairs and felt dizzy, staring at the hallway. I have an extra D there. Staring at the hallway of his house above his head. He almost decided to run up those stairs and close the door for good. It was probably the candle that changed his mind. He couldn't just leave a lit and unattended candle burning under his house, even in a basement that shouldn't exist. One more glance upstairs and he almost called to Trixie again. What would he have said? Accuse her of hiding a secret basement from him? Maybe ask if she lit the candle? If not her, then who? He didn't want to think about that. John crossed the room and bent to blow out the candle on the workbench amongst all those ancient tools. But then his attention locked on the scene out the window. Again, this had to be underground, so why was he looking into a backyard? He hesitated to say his backyard because though some details were the same, much was different, too much. The garage was at the wrong angle, the boards were the wrong color, and the paint was peeling to black rot underneath. Whoever had neglected to tighten the basement stair railings had also failed to protect that wood. The trees were there, but not quite in the right place. He could see the back of the neighbor's house because in this yard the fence was only partially finished. Boards stacked to one side away from the ones already hammered up into place. Another couple sat across two sawhorses, maybe waiting to be painted, but they looked as old, weathered, and forgotten as the boards on the wrong garage. Even the clouds in the sky were wrong. It was overcast through this window instead of bright and sunny. Say like in the world he had left above. Not to mention he was pretty sure the dull disk of the sun showing faint through these thick clouds was in the wrong place. It was either rising or setting from the wrong angle. He didn't have much time to take in this wrong yard from his impossible basement universe with its alien sun because there was another demon dog beyond that unfinished fence. Now even though John called the overworld neighbor's dog a demon, but as even though blah blah blah, but as annoying as it was, the dog in that sunny world was still a natural creature. I'm not sure if that sentence works, but I'm going to leave it for now and take a look at it again later. The dog down here appeared too long. Its face was almost that of a person wearing dog prosthetics. Yet as it moved with its nearly hairless coat sliding over its ribs, he could tell this animal was no costume. It sniffed the air and turned toward John's face in the dirty basement window. The animal bounded past the property lines and crossed the yard in awkward but effective leaps. John backed away from the window, knowing that single-pane glass was not going to hold this monster out. He held his hands up in front of him in a warning gesture. The dog thing placed its massive paws on both sides of the glass, on both sides of the glass. Let's say on the wall, on both sides of the glass. It raised itself and did not make a sound. Okay, making a few typos here. Sorry. It did not make a sound as it stared through into John's face at eye level. The white tongue lolled out one side of its open mouth with over-sharp teeth. They just stared at one another. John was afraid to move. The dog thing seemed happy to go on studying the quivering man inside. Something, okay, let's say John wished he'd kept that cigarette with him. All right. Something outside the window screeched and the dog looked. It gave a whimper that sounded... I put an ED on there. Lots of editing going on here today. That sounded too much like a human moan. The dog dropped out of view and John stood unmoving long enough to hear it digging and sniffing around the base of a wall that could not be there. John, he nearly wet himself, but held his bladder and the edge of the stairs frame behind him. He was afraid to speak for fear of attracting the terrible animal's attention again. John, is that you? Are you here? He turned his head toward the darkness between boxes leading down the other wing of the basement. Trixie? He whispered... He whispered her name and watched for movement out of the corner of his eye from the window. All right, from that window. John, I don't know where I am. Why'd you come down here at all? He kind of had to ask himself the same question now that he was here. Fortunately, she did not ask it, so he didn't have to defend himself. But he did need to find her and get them both up to the real world again. Trixie, come to my voice. She said, I don't know where I am. How far does this go? Too far already, he whispered. He called out a little louder. I'm coming to you. Keep talking so I can find you. He forgot about the window, the candle, and the dog as he looked for his wife in the darkness. He did think he should have... He did start to think. He did start to think he should have looked on all... He should have looked on all those cluttered benches for a working flashlight. But what were the odds that a guy who let his garage rot would have kept up with the batteries? Come on now. With the batteries in his flashlight. Let's make it flashlights plural. Of course, John thought he probably wouldn't paint a garage in that yard until the neighbors finished their fence. Trixie, keep talking. Keep talking. You know, that's what he did. Okay. Trixie, keep talking, I said. I'm walking blind here. About the time he decided he needed to go back for a flashlight anyway, the darkness got so thick. I'm sorry I'm finding all these typos, guys. It's one of those edits, I guess. Got so thick he was sure he was buried alive. It had that same crushing weight feeling as one of his fits. Then John stepped out into bright light and vivid color that put the overworld day and their silly pink house to shame. All sorts of creatures, make that plural, all sorts of creatures danced through this colorful world. Instead of flesh, they were made of chocolate and taffy. They reached for John's hands with their own cartoonish gloves and round, blinking cartoon eyes. John backed away and turned for the basement, but only saw endless grass and hills extending into forever. The grass was too green, like the plastic junk people put in Easter baskets. I need to go. One of the taffy creatures answered him. The dog is waiting that way. Trixie went this way. She's waiting for you. She's waiting for you. She needs you. All right. At least his headache was gone, and he wasn't sweaty anymore. He looked down at himself and froze. He recognized his favorite red and blue t-shirt from an old pair of brown jeans he had worn as a kid. The round fat belly he had worked so hard to get rid of was back too. He was looking at his body aged 10, maybe a little older, but he didn't think so. What did you do to me? He asked. One of the square chocolate people said, this was when you were happy. No sadness this way. That way leads back to the grinder, and more of your silly little pink house fits. Hey, he said. The chocolate man shrugged. Trixie likes it here. She comes all the time. My wife is here. A taffy creature giggled and said, you're too young for a wife. I'm not really a kid. Where is she? The candy people pointed past a syrupy river with peppermint bridges over them. One of the chocolate men said, and you can be a kid again if you'll just allow it. John didn't want to think about that right now. He wanted to find Trixie. Partly he didn't want to be here alone. Partly he wanted her to explain this secret world on the other side of a secret basement that she had been hiding from him. He allowed the candy people to take him across the bridge and through the rolling fields. He was about to demand they produce Trixie, but a castle rose out from the mist. Without another word, he let them take him further. At the base of the castle, a curved body coach with taffy horses on the front waited for him. The chocolate driver held up a licorice whip and said, We are getting closer. Climb in and I'll take you." "Can I explore the castle first?" John asked in a voice that sounded like a kid again. "We're in a hurry," the driver said. "Trixie is waiting, and you have work tomorrow, right?" John sighed. Right. He climbed inside. The door was rough with big crystals of sugar. The seat was soft, though, as he watched the castle fall behind them. As he put his hands down, he felt the seat was really cotton candy. He tore some off and ate it. "Butts have been on this candy," the boy giggled. "It tastes like candy butt." Now he laughed out loud as he ate more. This boy knew nothing of prison riots or panic attacks. He knew nothing about the trouble of holding together a marriage or the terror of losing a job in this economy. He just ate pieces of the carriage and enjoyed the ride. When they stopped, he leapt out and cried, "Trixie!" For all the world, young John could not remember whether that was his mom's name, his sister, his girlfriend, or his wife. All he knew was that he was supposed to find her. Instead, he stood before a tall, thin man. The man wore a bright crown, striped pants, and a peppermint scepter. He was clearly a king, and he smiled broadly down at John, but the boy felt an instinctual fear in his lower lizard brain. He remembered a scary dog, but couldn't recall where he saw it. "I'm the Candy Cane Man, and I welcome you to my kingdom, Little John." "I don't like being called little." "And why would you, John?" Candy Cane Man asked. "That would be the sort of thing that could turn a boy into an insecure man who is always fighting with the image of himself. No one wants to be that sort of creature. Am I right, John?" He had no idea what that meant. "I'm looking for someone." "I'm someone," the Candy Cane Man said. "You found me, and I'll show you everyone in the kingdom, no matter how far we have to go. If I show you everyone, then you will find your someone. Right, John?" He shrugged. "Then we are agreed. Join me, and let's get started." The Candy Cane Man led John onto his cotton candy cloud. They drifted out from the edge of the cliff and sailed high through the air above terrible, sharp peaks. Little boy John hugged the stranger's side. Candy Cane Man wrapped a hard, thin arm around the boy's shoulders and held him tight. John was hungry but didn't want to eat the cloud holding them up, so he stayed quiet as they sailed deeper and deeper into this sugary world. All right, let me center this. We are in the home stretch now. Trixie Raspberry emerged from the boxes in the room she called the candy basement. They say then. No, not then. It's supposed to be she. Sorry. I knew I had some kind of typo there. She leaned over a bench next to the window and blew out the candle. As a tendril of dying smoke rose, she spied that wiry dog sniffing around the yard. She would be happy if those neighbors ever finished that fence. She climbed the stairs, turned out the light, and closed the door to the basement that her husband did not have the kind of eyes to see. As soon as she let go of the knob, she felt the hard edge of the shelf where the door used to be. She knew that door would still be there any time she wanted it. But for now, Trixie realized from the light that it was much later than she thought. She must have been down there a while. She looked at her fingers and saw they were sticky from all the candy. John would have questions. If he had called for her and she hadn't answered, then she'd have to make up yet another story to explain herself. There were other ways to get him off the subject if need be, and she didn't mind the distraction herself. He was always in such a bad mood after work, anything that could change his outlook was welcome. Maybe she would surprise him with a distraction before dinner. He'd still be mad about late dinner. John, are you here? I lost track. She saw his bare feet on the bed. He must be having one of his headaches. He'd still want dinner and would be mad if she let him sleep through it. His lighter and a new cigarette sat on her bedside table. He must have just collapsed there. It was lucky he didn't get it lit before falling asleep. If he burned down the house, would the door have still been there for her to get out again? The thought of being stuck down there forever filled her with nervous fear. All right. As she tiptoed in, she saw he had stripped down to his briefs and underwear. He'd won his uniform washed and dried before morning. Then she saw his open mouth and his blank eyes. John? John? Trixie shook him and held his face. He was already cold. She put her ear to his chest and found it still and silent. That place, that terrible place that stole all his joy every day, had finally taken him. At least he passed here in his home instead of there. She took his cold hands in hers and found they were as sticky as hers. That's a lot of hers. Let me see if I can fix that sentence. She took his cold hands. Let's just take this out. Let's see if that works. She took his cold hands and found they were as sticky as hers. That works. Little slivers of sugary pink were stuck under his nails. Trixie looked out into the hallway and caught just a glimpse of the knob to the door to the candy basement before it melted back into the shelf. No, she said, couldn't be. He can't see it. He's not the type. He's not the type. He doesn't have a childish bone left in his body. Still, she washed her hands and brought a wet washcloth to clean his before she called anyone.